All right, folks, how you doing? Welcome back. So this is the Silurian Wars with Rome, Part 4. Disclaimer as always, under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. And once again, we're visiting the Great Deception. St. Paul's letter to Timothy. So Caractacus stood dignified and unmoved in the tribunal, and in a noble speech claimed to be descended from illustrious ancestors who governed many nations, contrasting the emperor's fortune with his own. He and his family were pardoned and were covered with praises and favors. His daughter Gladys was adopted by Claudius and assumed his family name of Claudia. She later married the young Roman senator Rufus Prudentius, who had large possessions. Both became Christians. St. Paul, in his farewell letter to Timothy, sends greetings to Pudens, Linus, and Claudia. Where had they met before, if not in Britain? Nestorius found that the removal of Caractacus did not lessen the activities of the Silures, but in fact made them the more determined for revenge under Arviragus. Anything but humbled. So orders for the construction of forts near Camulodunum were unsuccessful, for the commander of the camp and his legionaries were surrounded and nearly annihilated. The commander and 8 of his centurions, as well as a number of other men, were lost. The Silures also intercepted 2 auxiliary cohorts, and by liberal division of the spoils gained the support of other tribes. As a result, says Tacitus, Nestorius died, quote, weary of these defeats. I don't know how you say this. Aulus, maybe that's how you say it. Aulus Didius, who succeeded Nestorius, found the Silures anything but humbled. They overthrew a legion and were displaying great activity, as were also the neighbouring Brigantes, and were fighting among themselves. Claudius died in 64 in Didius' second year. It's quite funny because in Scots, Diddy means tit. But anyway, getting sidetracked. Anyway, I'm trying not to laugh when I say that name. In Didius' second year, and Seneca alludes to a temple dedicated to the emperor in Britain, where the natives worshipped him as a god. Didius, oh, honest to God. Overthrowing the Druids, the temple was erected at Camulodunum, where the Romans tried to enforce their dedication of Claudius upon the Silures, and this more than all else drove them into a frenzy of rage and indignation. Meanwhile, the Silures held the Romans at bay until 61, when Nero bestowed the governorship upon Suetonius Paulinus. This general first of all prepared to attack Mona, the sacred Druid island well fortified just off the mainland, with many Druidic groves, his object being to overthrow the Druids, who, however, with Druidesses, faced the Roman soldiers. The Druidesses, carrying torches, ran around, we are told, like furies, while the Druids uttered fearful imprecations and raised their hands towards the skies. They were apparently massacred, but whether the Roman chief's intentions were with, or whatever the Roman chief's intentions were with regard to Mona, his plans were interrupted by news of the sudden uprising of Boadicea, queen of the Iceni, and her allies, King Prasticus. So, as Tacitus comments laconically, the Britons had suddenly revolted. Boadicea's late husband, King Prasticus, had left his 2 daughters to the care of Caesar, whom he made his heir, hoping thus to keep his kingdom and his family free from injury. It was not to be. It throws a lurid light on the Romans that they not only abused their trust, but beat the queen, violated her daughters, and seized the estates of the principal Iceni. Where they dwelt is uncertain, but they were probably in Norfolk and the adjoining lands. Tacitus says that, quote, they entered into a secret compact with the Trinovantes and some others motivated by great bitterness towards the veterans. These were expelling folks from their homes in the new colony of Camledonham, seizing their lands and calling them captives and slaves, being supported by the army. Unbridled slaughter and destruction. So, nor was this all. The temple which had been erected to Claudius, where he had been deified, was, says Tacitus, a further cause of violent hatred, and the enemy, the Britons, prepared to make the colony an easy prey, as it had not been enclosed within walls. What? Why not? You think that would be the first thing to do? Anyway, many prodigies inflamed the popular mind, and without apparent cause, the image of the goddess Victoria fell and looked backwards as if going over to give victory to the Britons. The estuary of the Thamesis reflected the colony overturned. The ocean had a bloody tinge, and apparitions of dead men were left behind by the receding tide. The storm burst with unbridled slaughter and destruction of the Romans, where the aged and the women sought refuge in the temple, which was carried by assault in 2 days. The defeat of Cerelius, so Petilius Cerelius, legate of the Ninth Legion, who later was prominent in the siege of Jerusalem, marched to the relief, but was routed with the loss of all of his foot soldiers. All this is interpreted as having taken place in Essex, and it will be noted that the Thamesis is recorded, or supposed to have been recorded, in the annals. Also, Tacitus says that Suetonius hurriedly left Mona and, passing, quote, boldly through the enemy, reached Londinium, but his meagre following, as well as news of the defeat of Cerelius, decided him to abandon, quote, the town, though he forced the populace, including women and children, to march with the troops, and those who failed were massacred. The same slaughter, he says, took place at how do you say this? Hang on. Verulamium. Yeah, I'm just going with that. Verulamium. I'm assuming that's how you say it. My Latin is not the best. I'm a little bit rusty. Considerable reservation must be made in regard to the correctness of these two statements. A most ancient city. So, to begin with, if Suetonius were marching towards Camledonham, where the uprising occurred, why should he have marched, quote, boldly through the enemy? There is no record of any rebellion in the Midland counties through which he would pass. Secondly, the word Londinium appears to be an interpolation of Trinovantum. Thirdly, while there might have been trouble at Verulamium, there was another and very important Verulamium in Fifeshire, namely the present town of Dunfermline, a most ancient city and former birthplace and capital of early Scottish kings. Fourthly, the word Thamesis was not in the original. Phelps, the well-known historian of Somerset, says that Thamesis is a later interpolation and does not occur in the MS copy of the Bodleian Library at Oxford, nor in three others cited by the Reverend John Skinner, former rector of Camerton near Bath. The custom of the Caledonians. So someone has a motive for this dishonest piece of deception to lead the reader away from the true scent. Further doubt as to the accuracy of the region is aroused by the subsequent account of Tacitus, to the effect that when Suetonius, with some 10,000 legionaries, reached the scene of the disturbance and battle, the Britons had brought their wives in wagons to the outskirts of the field of battle to witness the struggle, and that Boadicea, with her daughters, stood in a chariot and harangued each tribe as it arrived. Such an assembly was the custom of the Caledonians. That it extended to the south of England is not acceptable, but the injured queen and her daughters might well have been present at this battlefield in the north. The losses in the Ninth Legion. So the account which says that the Britons were annihilated and that the Roman losses were only about 400 killed and wounded is also questionable. Tacitus adds that Boadicea poisoned herself. But Dion Cassius, on the contrary, asserts that she collected an army of 230,000, died a natural death, and was honourably interred. Indeed, the defeat could scarcely have been so overwhelming, for Tacitus admits that, with the army placed in winter quarters, preparations were made for continuing the war. 8 cohorts of auxiliaries and 1,000 horse were sent from Germany, and 2,000 legionary troops to fill up the losses in the Ninth Legion. Moreover, the Britons made no submission, and it was reported to Nero that the end of the war could not be expected until Suetonius was superseded, which, after a short inquiry, was brought about. So Nero sends Vespasian. These events tend to nullify the supposed overwhelming victory of Suetonius, and the guerrilla war continued on a wide scale until, in 69, Vitellius, during his brief imperatorship, sent Vettius Bolonus to replace Suetonius. It is very strange that there appear to be no Roman records of military movements in Britain from 62 until 71, but there are a few sidelights. In 66, Nero sent Vespasian from Rome to pacify the Jews of Jerusalem and Galilee, but in 69 he left Titus to defeat the Jewish rebels, whose raids and aggressions had made them a menace to Roman interests. Vespasian went himself to Alexandria to witness events during Vitellius's imperatorship. In the intervening struggle between the Roman leaders, we are told that the soldiers in Britain favoured Vitellius against Galba and Otho, but on Vespasian's proclamation, the Second Legion and others espoused his cause. The career of Vitellius Carellius. So, in the year 71, Jerusalem fell to Titus in 70. We are informed that with the triumph of Vespasian, the Britons, otherwise the Silures or Jews, quote, found their hopes reduced. The Brigantes, for one, caused much trouble, and Vitellius Carellius, now made propraetor or governor by Vespasian, fought many bloody battles with them. But Pliny, significantly, remarked of this period that nearly 30 years after the Claudian invasion, the Roman army had only extended their knowledge of the country to the vicinity of the Silva Caledoniae and not beyond. In other words, they had not conquered beyond Stirling. An interesting sidelight shed on these events, including the Jews, is contained in the career of Vitellius Carellius, whom we hear of first in 62 as commanding the Ninth Legion, so heavily defeated at Camulodunum, the other end of the civilized world. So in 66, when Vespasian landed to pacify Jewish unrest, wars, and plundering, Carellius served under him as legate of the Fifth Legion. In 69, when the Romans began the siege of Jerusalem, Carellius was present, and in 70 was entrusted by Titus with the formidable task of storming the Tower Antonia and the temple. After the fall of that city, Carellius was sent for a short time to Batavia, or Holland, to defeat the Germans who were troublesome. And in 71, Vespasian made him governor of Britain. In these circumstances, seeing that Carellius was consistently from at least 62 in the vicinity of Britain, could he simultaneously have been active at the other end of the civilized world where Jerusalem is supposed to have stood? It's a very good question, to be honest. The northern conquests of Agricola. As a matter of fact, he remained in Britain until 75, for we are told that Frontinus succeeded him and subdued the Silures, quote, whose valour and difficult country had hitherto been insurmountable. Yeah, just ask the English about that. They could tell you all about it. Yeah. How long were the Scottish Wars of Independence again? In this research, I must touch on Agricola, who took over the command in 78, shortly before his arrival. The boasted Roman victories could not have been so overwhelming after all. What, the Romans making a bunch of shit up? Surely you jest. For the Ordovices in Lanark nearly annihilated a body of cavalry and, quote, gave new hopes to others. Most of his first year was spent in conciliating the province, probably Judea. Evidently, he was in the region of the Forth and the Clyde, for in 80, quote, new nations were opened up, and the country was, quote, wasted as far as the Tay. Later, garrisons were placed in forts along the isthmus. Despite his victory over the Caledones, the northern conquests of Agricola were of no permanent value. In other words, we fought the Romans to a fucking standstill. Camelon, having reached this point in the sequence of events, is advisable to look further into the question of the situation of Camulodunum, which played so important a part in the war as a strategic point from the time of Claudius to that of Suetonius. It was on the showing of Tacitus a camp and a colony built earlier in the territories of the Silures or near to them. Astorius first formed it as a check to rebels in conjunction with forts to keep them in their place and force them to perform their obligations. In view of the tribes involved, it could not have been anywhere near Essex, or as some have claimed at Gloucestershire, or in Somerset, or Gloucester, I should really say. The latter surmise based on the incorrect assumption that the Silures were confined to South Wales, for which there is not a vestige of evidence. The Colonia of Camulodunum, the fortress of the Camels, or Campbells, pronounced Camels, stood near the site of the present town of Falkirk, 25 miles west of Edinburgh. It is known to the Scots as Camelon and associated, as so many outstanding places are in that neighbourhood, including Arthur's Seat with King Arthur, the British hero of prehistoric times. Camelon, or Camulodunum, was the place where Astorius, as Tacitus states, first founded his colony of veterans, trained soldiers to give stability to the Roman arms in that region, and whose overbearing methods roused the Britons nearby to insurrection. The fort of Camulodunum, uncovered by General Roy in the 19th century, commanded the Forth and Clyde Isthmus when it was erected, about midway between the two extremes of water. It was near to the Brigantes and also the Silures in the region of Edinburgh. And yet, when you Google this, you find pretty much absolutely the square root of fuck all. So, there we go. I'm going to have to get that book, General William Roy, in order to find out more. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, the Antonine Wall, or Graham's Dyke. So, the fortress was built on an elevated plateau of considerable size to which the colony area was added later. Subsequently, the fortress was linked up with a series of fortifications along the vallum, or wall, attributed to Agricola in 79, and later yet to, how do you say this name? Lollius Urbicus, I'm guessing, I don't know, who erected another wall of turf with some stone soon after the death of Hadrian, known as the Antonine Wall, after Antonius Pius, or Graham's Dyke. Camulodunum was brought into close contact with the vallum and its nearby forts by later additions impinging on the earlier British fortress. A causeway originally connecting the fortress with the vallum now lies some 9 feet below ground under Kincardine moss. Dion Cassius describes it as the capital of Cunobelin, which is doubtful, for his capital appears to have been Trinovantum or Stirling. General Roy. So Astorius captured it from Cunobelin's successors, presumably from Caractacus, and Tacitus informs us that in order to contend with the Silures, the Colonia was formed with Roman veterans as a check to further rebels. Their temple was erected to Claudius, where the Romans tried to force the natives to worship him as a god, which maddened them to revolt. Can't imagine why. I mean, the names of the Romans alone would inspire the Britons to revolt. I mean, they're so fucking ridiculous. Astorius, Didius. Come on, for fuck's sake. Am I the only one who finds Latin names hysterical? Try not to crack up when I read these slides, but anyway. At Camulodunum, the colony was identified by the foundations of buildings and the usual offices, it being only protected by a surf wall, which confirms Tacitus. There is a site in the centre of the area which General Roy suggested was occupied by the temple. The general was an archaeologist who devoted himself to identifying the antiquities of Camulodunum as described by Miss Jenny Mothasol in her work Roman Scotland. So again, check out the book on the right there. I'm going to get that. Because why are we hearing about absolutely none of this, apart from Beaumont going into it? But anyway, the 14th Legion. MacDonald, who examined the site towards the end of the 19th century, stated that Camulodunum possessed solid stone edifices, praetorium, palace, and baths, employed tiles for roofing and floors, used Samian ware, possessed bronze and enameled fibulae, and various weapons. Among other finds were coins from Vespasian to Marcus Aurelius. One stone is engraved with the 20th Legion, who recovered the city after its seizure by the Britons. Batilius Carelius. You see what I mean about the fucking names? Okay, dubbed the 14th Legion conquerors of the Britons. After their exertions at Camulodunum in 61, the 20th were engaged in holding the Antonine Wall later and bore the word Victrix on their standards after recovery of the fortress, a possible reference to the feud that arose relative to the statue of Victoria, the Victress, and the temple of Claudius. Furious anger and indignation. So Camulodunum is one of the outstanding clues to Britain's history under the Romans. Let us not overlook, moreover, in coming to a final understanding of these activities, that as Edinburgh was the real and existing Jerusalem of that period, the furious anger and indignation of the people is entirely in accordance with their character and excitement. When there was any question over the statue representing the goddess of victory, to say nothing of the attempt to force them to worship Claudius as a god. I mean, for fuck's sake. As the Caledonians and Highlanders worshipped Apollo and Hermes and probably other Olympian deities, it would not excite them to such a degree, but since the Silures and Jews were one and the same, the turmoil and massacre could be understood. I mean, fucking Claudius, a god. Get to fuck. The River Carron, at the time when this uprising reached its greatest height in 61, there seemed to the Britons a possible chance of throwing the Romans out altogether. When Suetonius, after wasting valuable time, was advancing by forced marches, the Silures and their allies may have thought they could hold Camulodunum against him. Carelius had been routed. Suetonius, approaching, had with him the 14th Legion and the veterans of the 20th, as well as other auxiliaries. There can be no doubt as to the site, vestiges of which survive at Falkirk, where the River Carron washes its eastern flank, one of the most important remains of the vicissitudes of early Britain. And that concludes part number 4. Thank you very much for watching, and be sure to leave your thoughts and comments below, especially when it comes to the daft Latin Roman names like fucking Didius, Carelius, whatever he is. Fucking Roman names, man. Is it any wonder the Britons and the Silures rose up and battered them? You want us to worship who is a god? Fuck off. Get to fuck. I mean, really. But at the same time, reading this, was it one part that kind of infuriates me here? Let me go back a few slides. So the fort of Camulodunum, uncovered by General Roy in the 19th century. We never fucking learn about this in school. We never learn about this anywhere or at university, because I studied, Scottish history when I went to Stirling University many years ago. We never hear about any of this. You have to go to Beaumont to even hear about it. And here's this book about General William Roy, father of the Ordnance Survey. I mean, the amount of shite we have to swallow and the amount of stuff we're not told. That's why I do presentations like this. But like I say, leave your thoughts and comments below. Peace out from Maximus Pricimus. See you later.